Born in Cork, born Fitzwilliam Street, grew up in Clontarf until I was 12, 14.
And in the do you remember much of those early years?
Oh yes, of course.
What did you do? Where did you play? Did you play out in the Strand in Clontarf?
Oh gosh, no. No, we had good front and back garden. And pleading, I got a dog, Scotty. But I was only, 6, 7, when my mother decided that she wanted me, being the youngest. Little brother had died before I was born. And I didn't know that for years, but I missed him sorely. Because my friends all had brothers and sisters, and the nearest one to me was Afric, who was 6 years older. Now that's a lot for a child, from 6 to 12.
Oh yeah.
So in a sense I was an only child in that sense, yeah. We had a nice big long back garden for Dublin. And my father loved growing vegetables and my mother grew flowers. Well, the first year my mother took me to school and picked me up.
By car?
No, we didn't have car in those days.
Bus?
It was wartime as well.
Oh really? Okay.
Yeah, usually the 30 bus, which still runs. You see, there were 4 others older than me at home. Well, my sisters were with the Dominicans in Eccles Street, and because I got on so well in Leeson Street, they were just transferred the following September, and they were very angry because they had to leave all their friends behind. So they were just transferred to Leeson Street. After that, it was they who, I think, took me to school and took me home, until I was old enough to travel by myself.
And during those years, did you spend the summers in Donegal?
Oh yes, for the very summer I was born. In fact, I was born early June, and we went up to Donegal. And on the train, evidently, I was being fed a little bottle, and it damaged my throat. Probably the whole Donegal Railway. So I was very delicate, I think, for a month, and I nearly died.
Wow.
But after that, every summer we rented a house in Portmala, looking down on the Portmala beach, yeah.
And what kind of memories do you have of that time, like playing on Killihoy Beach and being with your cousins?
Well, it was great to have such a crowd. But do you know Frank O'Connor's short stories?
Yes.
Well, I have one very vivid memory. You see, I made my first communion in Leeson Street and was very, very well prepared for it. First communion, first confession. It's still very vivid, the whole picture in my mind. But we went to Donegal shortly after that. It was school holidays, and come Saturday, my mother said, "Now, confessions," because it was the rule in the family you went once a fortnight. And Afric said, "I'll take her." So she took me probably by the hand, and we walked in the long road in those days to Dufanahay and up the church. And there were quite a few of older people sitting there. So Afric said, "Now don't worry, I'll go in first and I'll tell the priest that it's your second confession." So I was really reasonably happy. She went in, came out, held the door open. In I went. She shut the door, and I was left there in complete darkness. I had never known any idea about a box. So this is really the same as Frank O'Connor's story, First Confession. It was complete darkness and I couldn't see anything. I didn't know where to kneel down. Just could feel 4 wooden walls. So I started off, rattled off my confession as best as I could, and I had just finished when the shutters went back and a little fragment of light came, and I got such a shock. I made a desperate effort to get. I screamed and howled and kicked and finally got the door open because it was on a spring.
Oh, yeah.
So Afric then came dashing across to pick me up. And I said, I'm never going to have confession again.
And so that was all during the war. Like, do you remember when the war ended and the celebrations?
No, I remember when the war began, walking up the back lane in Clontarf with my friend Dierdre, and we heard that Hitler had invaded Poland.
Really, yeah.
We didn't really know what it meant, but we thought it was something very, very serious. And then rationing came in. I never saw a banana or an orange, I think, until I was, a good deal older. But there were coupons and then distribution of these horrid things called gas masks, which was very scary. But I loved school.
Where did you go to secondary school?
No, I went on 8 years in Leeson Street, right from so-called Montessori, post-Montessori up until I was 8 years anyway. Then my father, you see, who was a vet, was transferred from Dublin back to Cork. And so I knew that Terry and Afric and Maeve, not yet Maeve, Terry and Afric were in Roscrea because they always passed through Dublin and stayed with us on their way to boarding school. And I used to listen to everything they had to say at school. I knew all about the girls in all the classes and so on. And I begged and begged to be allowed to go. And finally, because my father was transferred south, it was decided that I could go to Roscrea too. Now, excuse me, I was always very good at languages. And the problem was, well, I had started French at the age of 6 and was extremely well taught by an old American sister. And it was fantastic the way she taught us. So I picked up French very quickly, and then at the age of 10, Latin and German. Problem with Roscrea, there was no German in those days. So it was arranged that I get private lesson, again with another old nun who had entered in Poland. So she gave me private lessons because my parents wanted me to continue with my languages. Now also remember, perhaps this isn't important at all, but my father was worried at one stage that I wasn't working hard enough at school in Leeson Street. In those days we had something, well, all over our schools all over the world, we had something called weekly notes about your behaviour. It was a very solemn occasion on Saturday mornings, and then people were called out who were best in the class for certain subject. My father heard about that, and he knew I really loved chocolate. So he said, right, I'll give you a bar of Lemon's chocolate was a great big slab in those days. Cost about a shilling if you get across a class. So I came home with across the class for French, and I got my chocolate. The next week I came home with 2, and I got 2 bars. And the next week I came home with 3, and then my father said, that's enough. I know, I'm sure now you're working hard enough.
So did you enjoy Ross Gray?
I loved Ross Gray. Well, I don't know, you knew that Terry for a year lived with us in Dublin.
Oh yeah.
Because she had back problem and spine curvature when she was growing up. So she came with me to school in Leeson Street. But she had no French, so I let her copy my work. And because, I mean, her Irish was good, but I had very little Irish. I was not well taught Irish at all. I never liked it, and even had to do it in UCD for my first year, my degree, because in the meantime then all this spelling had been changed. So I was glad to give that up. Anyway, I loved having Terry, that was like having a sister of my own age. Terry is just a year and a bit, or a year and a half older than me. So I loved school. Terry went to her.
Were there any particular events in school, like some mischief that you got up to, or any funny events?
Well, I remember being teased. You say I was different from the others, and so they said to me I was adopted, and I believed them. I was also teased about my thick eyebrows, which met in the centre. And I think Afric said that is a sign you're deceitful. Anyway, I remember at needlework class in Leeson Street, when we did our sewing, and then the others were called up to see the pictures in the book, and there was a scissors lying on my desk, so I thought, now's my chance. So I took out the scissors to cut these eyebrows that they were always teasing me about. But when I got down to the cloakroom, I saw 2 big bald patches, and I think, oh gosh. So got home to tea, kept my head held down, and then someone said, what on earth? So I said to my mother, oh please let me stay home until my eyebrows grow again. Now another thing I remember, which I used much later when I was in Scotland, teaching sex education in the primary schools to the parents as well as the children together. Sheila Call, you know Sheila?
Yeah.
Came up to Dublin, I don't know why, but she was giving me all the news of Donegal, and she said, so-and-so is going to have a baby. I said, she can't, she's not married. Of course, Sheila said. So we had this argument, and Sheila's lip curled. She said, don't you know? I didn't know. So I was always right, and I wanted to prove to her that she was wrong. So I remember going home after that conversation. We had a huge oval dining room table. We were all sitting around it, my mother and father, and Susan sitting down when I said, Mummy, you can't have a baby if you're not married. And I got a big kick on the table. And I said, who kicked me? And Mum, and they were all very embarrassed. And I said, you can't have a baby. So again, a big kick. And my father cleared his whole throat and said, pass me the jam, please. And conversation was changed. But I wanted to know, I wanted to tell she that she was wrong and I was right. I wasn't interested in sex in those days at all, but I always liked to have the right answer. So it worried me why they questions and were always answered. Why they didn't answer that one. So now this apocrypha, but my memory is I went in to school early and asked the boys, and they told me, of course you could, and lots more, which of course wasn't true at all. But that worried me why my mother, who had been a Red Cross nurse during the war, and my father was a vet, why they didn't tell me anything at all. Not for years, until later, just before Africa got married, she gave me a total rundown on everything. But my mother didn't. Well, that is typical of those days.
Yeah, yeah.
But I was determined that I was going to do it for Children's Scotland, because I was, at that stage, I was the high school advisor, and I wanted the children, before they came into biology classes, etc., to have a proper grasp of the beautiful beauty of sexuality, and not all these dangers that they run into with people, men exposing themselves along the canal bank on their way home from school. So I had quite a lot of interest and anecdotes.
When did you join? When did you become a nun, and at what point did the thoughts start to appear? And what age are you prepared for that vocation?
Well, you won't believe this. At the age of 6, on my first communion day, it was quite clear to me. Although I was pretty wild and I loved climbing trees and all kinds of things, Maeve will tell you I was wild when I came to Donegal in the holidays. At home they used to say I was a street angel and a house devil. But ever since the age of 6, I was quite clear. I had lots of other ideas. I wanted to be a service surgeon. I've forgotten what else. But it was quite clear, it was a kind of secret with me, that I was going to become a religious sister.
And did that feeling remain consistent throughout your teenage years?
Yes, even at the high school and secondary school, it was quite clear.
And then, do the school have a program for girls who are preparing for the?
Oh, not at all. They had these nuns who used to come to school, looking for vocations and telling us, oh, how wonderful the life was. It was a love. We laughed at all that. It was a lot of nonsense.
So when you were doing your final year exams, what were your options? What were you thinking about? Where would you like to study afterwards? What would you like to do afterwards? What were you planning for?
Well, of course, I wanted to go to university. I did my matric and my leaving in Musgrave, and then I went to Germany for a year, because my German was quite good, and there I became fluent very quickly.
What was Germany like? And what year was that?
49. The war was over at that stage, but Germany was flat, especially Cologne. I was in one of our houses north of Cologne in Bonn, and I was there au pair, helping with the juniors and going to classes with the seniors who were older than me, their leaving cert, or the so-called leaving cert, because so many of them had missed out on the war years, had missed two years. So I was just 18. They were in the early 20s. Didn't know whether their fathers or brothers were alive in concentration camps or where. But it was a wonderful year which I enjoyed lovely friendships there, except they were very philosophical, and it took me a long time to join in the conversations. At first, for about 10 days, I understood nothing, even though I had got good scores in my leaving and matric. But then fluency came very quickly. I went home for Easter with one of my friends who lived on the Russian border. Wonderful, huge old castle and woods in Bad Soden-Allendorf. I loved Germany, and I think at Easter time then, it was Holy Year 1950, I went with the English friends of my cousins in London to Rome on a pilgrimage. And I wanted to enter in Germany, but my parents would not allow it. So they said, right, you come home at the end of the year, June I think. I came home, and you can enter in Mount Anvil then in September. So I had my last holiday in Donegal that summer, and then came back, and on the 8th of September, I entered here in Mount Anvil. Never been to school here. We didn't like Mount Anvil. We thought they were very snobby, and we were very angry when they sent, your granny, Antonina, sent Angeles to school here, because all the rest of us, Terry, Afric, Maeve and Rosaline, had been in Roscrea, and we were strong Roscreans. Sport was wonderful in Roscrea. I loved hockey, cricket, wasn't so good at tennis, but baseball, and the library was good. So I really enjoyed high school, or secondary school, as it was called in those days. I had an Austrian pen friend, because I was doing German, as I say, in Roscrea. And when I was in Germany, then her family invited me to Vienna for Christmas. And that was a thrilling and exciting time. I remember traveling by train. I had to travel through the Russian zone to Vienna. The sisters had asked me to tell a small parcel to the sisters in Vienna. I said, sure, of course. It was enormous, lots of books inside, and in the Russian zone, these great big Russian soldiers with their furry hats and Astrakhan collar, etc., came into the carriage, and what's that? And I said, well, I don't know. So they had to open it and examine, and just looked at it, grunted, threw it back. But it was wonderful in Vienna that Christmas, because there was loads of snow, and her father had been Rittmeister under Franz Josef. And they had lost, she said, everything in the war to the Nazis. Well, they had a huge castle in Graz. I never saw it, just pictures, but that was confiscated. They lived in the Stubenring in Vienna, which is a very, very fashionable place, beautiful home. And she was always telling me how poor they were, and my eyes were out on sticks at the beautiful beauty of this flat. He was very proud. He had been Rittmeister, what was that, under Franz Josef. He had been a Vienna choir boy, And he was so proud of his Vienna, so he used to take me around Vienna every day and taste the food specialities in a different restaurant, because Erica was at school during the day, and then I got dancing lessons with her young brother, taught to teach how to dance Vietnamese dances properly.
Did you ever go to any of the big Viennese waltzes?
Oh, one big party, and there was another in the house, and her father drew me aside, and that night into one of these huge rooms with great folding doors. So he called him aside and he said, "What's this? I hear that you are going to enter a convent." I said, "Yes." He said, "It's not too late," he said, "and those who enter convent have been disappointed in love." I thought that was hilarious. He said, "It's not too late to change your mind." I was still only 18 years of age. He was divorced and remarried, and his son also divorced and remarried. The great marital complication. They were terribly good to me, but I had to try escape out the window in morning to get to mass because I don't think they would have approved.
You returned and you became a nun. What were the first couple of years like? Where were you? What were
Here, in Mount Anvil.
Were you teaching in the school?
Oh gosh, no, novices weren't. We were kept saying you have had what is called the spiritual year, and then we had a study year in which we were being taught how to teach.
And what are your memories of those years? Do you have many fond memories?
I enjoyed them. I thought they were good. Meantime, Paddy had been in Rome to be finally professed. She came back living here in the community because she was working down in the primary school. I rarely saw her. She used to take me for a walk, I think, once a month. But you see, I was only 11 when she entered. She's 8 years older than me, and I don't know her at all. And now she doesn't know me because she has Alzheimer's. Doesn't even recognize me. One day she said, "Sure, I know you." I said, "Yes." She said, "What's your name?" Told her. And then she said, "Oh yes, Dierdre Doyle, who has just recently died." She's very confused.
And when you were a nun in the early years, did you continue to go to Donegal for the summers?
Oh gosh, no. No. We were totally enclosed. We didn't go out. I didn't go home for 17 years. That was not allowed. We had what was called enclosure.
Wow. So you must have missed all your family and friends.
I was just as I am now, totally cut off.
Was that hard?
Yes and no, but we had a pretty, we were a group of novices. Sometimes we were as many as 20, usually a smaller group as sisters come and went. But it was study, silence, prayer, very regimented, in a way a bit like school, except it was silent. In the dining room we read books, or books were read to us during meals. It's also totally different from nowadays.
And were you able to talk, when you say it was silent, like were you able to chat to the other novices?
No, only once a day. We had what we called after lunch trios. We could go walking for about 20 minutes you couldn't choose your companions. You were told, you and you and you go together, and you three together, and so on. And then later in the evening, we had what was called general recreation, where you sat around in a circle. It was controlled by one of the sisters or the mistress of novices, so you didn't get much chance to speak.
And in those days, what did you look forward to the most? Did you look forward to, walking with someone, or the group conversations, or what were the things that made you?
Nothing really, until you made your vows and then you were told where you were to go next. So we had an examination in our ability to teach. We were teaching each other, and then I was told that I was to go back. I was to go to Leeson Street, which was back to mine old school, there to learn how to be a mistress of discipline, and there I taught French mostly for a few years, and then geography, which was not at all one of my subjects, but I was. We had a very fierce head teacher who wiped the floor with me most mornings in front of the school. So I was there for 5 years.
This is when you were a novice, or back when you were?
No, after. It was as a novice we had 2 years of training, at least 6 months, and then 2 years. The spiritual year, and then the juniorate, what was called, we still had white veils, the white juniorate, which was our training education, because we were not allowed to go to university. They were afraid we would run away or meet young men or whatever. So we had a white juniorate, and then we had another year of what we called black juniorate after we had made our first vows. But very good teachers there who gave me quite a lot of confidence, though when I was thrown into the school I was scared stiff of the children. But then very quickly I decided I really enjoy teaching.
And it sounds to me that it must have been hard. I mean, it sounded so strict. Here you are, a young girl who's travelled to Germany, seen the world, had this exciting time, and then suddenly you're in a place where you're not allowed to talk to anyone.
Exactly.
That must have been hard.
Well, we sort of, it was a different atmosphere. It was pre-Vatican II, and I could only see my parents once a month.
So you wouldn't have thought to question it. You just
not in those days. No, you didn't. Afterwards, of course, but not at the time. It was all totally accepted. Though some of the novices left, and that was a bit of a shock at the time, and I suppose it made me ask, well, should I be going to? But I thought, no, I've decided, I've given my life to God, and so I'm staying here no matter what happens.
And did you make very close friends from that period?
No. Well, they scattered. Well, one was sent to Africa, one was sent to Scotland, one went to Japan, and when I was in China, I met her again in Tokyo during my years in China, and I was with her very shortly before she died of, it was a TB, yes. No, not TB, cancer of the lungs, yes. She was a lawyer before she entered. Very brilliant. Wonderful tennis.
What about your years in UCD?
Oh, I love them. I loved study. Uh, I was
Did you live here, near here?
No, I was living in Leicester Street. At first, I was not allowed to go alone out on the street because, as explained, we were in enclosure. But then Vatican II lifted that. I got permission to go across Earlsford Hat Street to Earlsford Terrace on my own. And then I spent those 4 years. I had a wonderful Latin professor, Professor Johnny O'Mara, and wonderful German professor as well. Then at the end of my first year, I dropped French, though I loved French and had achieved honours level, but I was told we had plenty of French teachers. So I continued with the double honours course in Latin and German, then went on and did my higher dip, continued teaching until Leeson Street was closed. I was sent to Roscrea as head teacher, spent 7 years there, and then was transferred to Scotland. I knew I had a missionary vocation. It's something is almost impossible to explain to anybody who doesn't have it or never had it.
And could you not realise that vocation earlier within the church? Could you not convince the
No, I applied when I was in Rome in 1959 and I was told to pray about it. If that was what God wanted, I would be sent on the missions. I was sent first of all to Scotland. I was there for 6 months, but I still knew that someday I was going to China. Can't explain that, but I knew it.
What were the highlights of the 19 years in Scotland?
I was training teachers and I loved doing that.
What part of Scotland?
Edinburgh, Cardinal Gordon Joseph Gray, long since dead, asked me to become religious education advisor for the Archdiocese of St Andrews and Edinburgh. So I had to train teachers. I visited the 11 Catholic high schools in those days in the diocese. I trained Eucharistic ministers in the parishes. As I said, I trained parents and teams for sex education for children in primary school before they moved into high school, because I saw there was a great need for that. When the Russians Soviets withdrew from Hungary, you see our schools and educational institutions in Hungary had been confiscated. They were given back then in the around about 1989, 1990. I do remember exactly. So we were asked, anyone ready to go to Budapest, because we've been made back these huge educational establishments.
Did you apply to go to Budapest?
No, I didn't. I said at that meeting, I said, it's not Hungary I want to go to. I want to go to China. And my superior general, Scott, wonderful woman, said, what did you say? Repeat that and come and talk to me about it. She said, because we want to get back into China, from which we had been expelled by Mao Zedong. 1989, when the Tiananmen Square massacre broke out, I felt now I really must go to China. Ever since I was a child or teenager, perhaps, I knew I had a call to China. People said, don't be ridiculous, you know nobody there, you don't know the language, what would you do? But I was determined it would happen. So after Tiananmen, I got permission from. In those days, China was crying out for English. English was terribly important. It is now, of course.
Those days meaning the 80s.
Yes, possibly before at that, but certainly in those days.
When did you finish in Edinburgh?
In 1993, when I was accepted by Amity and accepted by VSO, my superior said, okay, China, but you must find your own way in, because we could send you, we're international, we could send you anywhere in the world, we cannot send you to China. I said, I know of 3 ways, may I explore them? She said, sure, go ahead. So I knew about the VSO, Voluntary Service Overseas, because some of my students in Craiglockhart had also, after training, gone abroad with them to different parts. People said, you're crazy. You're in your 60s. You don't know anyone there. You don't know any Chinese. While I was still driving around Edinburgh, visiting schools, I put a tape in the car and listened to Chinese conversation, etc. But I didn't have much time to learn the language. But I also did the course, the TEFL course, teaching English as foreign language.
Yes.
In a so-called prestigious school in Edinburgh, but it was sheer waste of time. Learned nothing from them and never used any of the stuff they gave us. I knew I didn't need it. In fact, I had to teach one of their teachers how to use the overhead projector. She hadn't a clue. I prefer to go with VSO because I know about them. Some of them had sent teachers to Africa, to our sisters in Uganda. So I accepted the offer from VSO. They said, how about going to, this was my placement interview. They said, how about medical college? I said, well, I have Latin and a certain amount of Greek, so I could be useful there. I got on the plane in London. My nephew was there to say goodbye, and then it took off. 10 minutes later.
What did you feel like in that airplane?
10 minutes after takeoff, the whole bottom seemed to fall out of my life, and I said, they were right, I am crazy. But there is no
So you got the fear, you got frightened.
I'm not saying fear. There is no way I could say to the pilot, hi, stop a minute, or please turn back. But then I had the experience. I was carrying the Blessed Sacrament, and the Lord seemed to say clearly, do not be afraid, I am with you. And after that, I never had any fear or loneliness in China. I was aware that God was there and that I was where God wanted me to be.
Do you wish you had gone to China earlier?
Of course I do, and I would love to be there still. I love and admire the courage of the Chinese people. I have a great many friends. Even yesterday I was replying to one of mine. Most of them called me Grandma. He is a brain surgeon, great friend of mine, and he's doing his very best to get me to come out. And he said, we'll look after you. I said, look, there's no way I would be allowed to travel. He said, we can raise all the expenses, etc. We want you, we miss you, we need you. They were fantastic. They are young men and young women. Some of them hungry for God, hungry to find meaning in life. 2 of them said to me, shortly after I left, pray for us because We have everything now. We are successful surgeons. We have good jobs. We have, well, one child who was, in those days was, now they're allowed now if they want. We have our child. I have a nice wife. I have a good home. They had come from terribly poor places before. We have everything, but life is empty. It seems to have no purpose. They are totally dedicated surgeons working day and night to try and save their patients. But a very tough life still, but they said materially we have everything, but spiritually we are hungry. Some of them say we pray for you, they do their Tai Chi, they pray. They are fantastic people. One, a nurse, an expert in diabetes, desperately to get, she has 2 little girls now, desperate to get them baptized, but she cannot find a priest. The churches are shut. You're not allowed to bring anybody under the age of 17 to a church anyway, or to any kind of religious. The rest of the world does not understand what is going on outside China, but when we communicate, sometimes my emails are blocked by China, said this is sensitive material. I must tell you this because before I went to China, I was given a lot of, by the priests in the Diocese of St Andrews and Edinburgh, giving a lot of information, probably had come from Taiwan, what they knew about religion in China. It was about, well, you see, there is no such thing, although a great many people in these parts don't understand, and I have books to prove it. There is no such thing as a Chinese Catholic Church, but there is the Catholic Church in China, which is watched by the Chinese Patriotic Association, who are watchdogs for the government to report on anything they disapprove of. Anyway, I was told we don't know anything. Well, I had to have our operation also on my thyroid before I went. The doctor in Edinburgh said, look, we don't know anything about Chinese medicine, so we'll have to remove that lump on your thyroid. It was not malignant. It was successfully removed. Half of it, you see, you have 2 glands here. They took one array, but they said, we know nothing about it, about medicine in China, so by precaution, we will remove it. No problem. But also, the bishop said to me, look, we know nothing about religion in China, whether you can ever go to Mass or the sacraments again. So take the Blessed Sacrament with you, which I did. A priest gave it to me.
What do you mean the Blessed Sacrament? The wafer?
Sacred Host.
The wafer. The Sacred Host.
The Sacred Host. I had a small pyx. I could only fit 11 in it. Anyway, people said you're crazy at your age, and I was still convinced this was right, and my superior general also backed me fully. One teacher in China, an ordinary, very nice woman, told me ever since the age of 5, I heard this from many of them, there is no God. That was dinned into them. She came to see me one day. I was not supposed to speak about religion. I don't know what they knew about me at first, but she said to me, do you believe in God? I said, yes, of course I do. I said, do you? She said, I think so. But she said, ever since we were 5, it was dinned into our heads. There is no God. That's pure superstition.
So after the first 3 weeks in Beijing, I presume.
Yes, we were then sent to our destinations.
And what was your destination?
Changzhou.
How long were you in? How long did you stay in Changzhou for?
14 years.
So what is Changzhou? How big is the city? And what was the place you were staying in like?
It was called a small, medium-sized city. Nothing like the size of Beijing.
Probably 1 million people or something, right?
Probably it's growing. It was a coal and iron mining area, filthy. Coal dust everywhere.
Are there restaurants in the city?
So-called, yes. There's one donkey restaurant. I've eaten a lot of donkey meat. It was a donkey town. I was given a very primitive flat. Survived and loved it. Terrible poverty. When I saw what people had to put up with and saying, wasn't Mao Zedong wonderful? Of course, I didn't think that, but I had to be careful what I said.
Were there any foreigners in the city at the time?
No, only two of us. Well, four of us. Two of them, two who were sent with me, were sent to the Teachers' College, and Jill Swan and myself were sent to the Medical College. Jill stayed her 2 years and then went home, the others too. But I stayed on because I was determined I was going for life. It was a huge challenge, but I got a wonderful welcome. Students, neighbours, everybody was so good. The kids around all adopted me shyly as foreign grandma. Their poverty was horrendous. So I had all sorts of interesting adventures. The archivist is trying to get me to write it all down. But I've forgotten so much and my computer won't work properly.
Can you remember one of them even? One of those adventures?
Well, I was interviewed by the secret police twice. One local, the Shanxi provincial secret police, and one by the national because they thought I was a Vatican spy. As I say, I didn't know about church for 6 months until I finally discovered it and then went to Mass. We were given a booklet when we arrived. Unfortunately, I don't have it. Foreigners may attend religious service in their own religion. There were 5, as I said, approved then.
Oh, yeah.
But you may not speak about, you may not bring anyone else. I never did, though some of my students went secretly.
You played down the fact that you were a nun.
I didn't play down anything. I lived my religious life as best I could. For 6 months I couldn't find a church, but after my first trip to Tokyo at the so-called, Lunar New Year holiday, I went to stay with our sisters in Tokyo for a few weeks, and passing through Shanghai, I discovered that there were churches in Changzhou as well. So when I got back, I went out to look for them. Now I had a lot of misgivings because could I go to the registered church or the underground? I knew I couldn't go to underground because it would get them into trouble. But going to the registered, which was not in communion with Rome, and it was controlled by the so-called Patriotic Association. So I wondered what on earth I should do, but in Tokyo I met an Irish Jesuit from Belfast, wonderful man, Father Bill Johnson, who was an expert. He's dead now. He had been 50 years in Tokyo, a world-renowned expert on religions. He said to me, now look, you make up your own mind. He said, these priests here are illegal in the eyes of the government.
So what?
But they are validly trained and ordained. The masses.
Were they Chinese priests? What nationality?
Oh yes.
So the priests in Changzhou in the church were Chinese.
Yes, because all foreigners had been expelled.
And they practiced was it a Catholic church? Was it similar to Catholicism?
When I discovered it, yes.
But it wasn't officially recognised by the Vatican, as I understand it.
Well, they were not allowed to be in touch at all.
Okay, yeah.
But when I first met the bishop, who had been
Did they give mass? Did members of the public come along and accept mass?
Oh yes.
Wow.
You see, you don't understand this, but this bishop had been in jail in the labor camp for 28 years. Wonderful man, a saint if ever I have met one.
He was a Chinese Catholic priest.
Yes.
Wow. And he started this
Trained.
church.
No, he didn't start it. And he was part of the Catholic Church.
Did the church
China.
look like a church? I mean, was it?
Yes.
So it was Catholic in the 19th century, or?
It was thoroughly Catholic until Mao Zedong's Red Guards devastated it. And then finally in 1989, permission was given for the reopen and the establishing of 5 religions in China. Muslim, Catholic, Taoist, which is the only real Chinese religion, Buddhist, and the so-called Protestant Free Self-Church. All Protestant denominations are under this umbrella.
Yes.
Currently, there are at least 10 million Catholics in China. More than that.
More than Irish, God.
Oh yes, and far more fervent than Irish.
There are more Chinese Catholics than Irish Catholics in the world.
In China, but also in Taiwan and Singapore and elsewhere. The rest of the world has no idea what is going on, what they have been through, the heroism. I vowed I would never again complain about anything when I saw what they had to put up with. Wonderful people, strength of character. I took, when I got to know the bishop, he died in 1998 when I was at home. He was dying of leukemia. But I got as much of his story I could. And I brought 2 of my students.
What's his story? What happened to him?
Oh, I told you he was, well, in when the revolution began, I was threatening, excuse me, I've got a frog. He knew what was going to happen. The last bishop of Changzhou, who was Dutch, I have met his relatives who came to visit later, said to him, I am going to ordain you bishop because the revolution is coming and all religion is going to be persecuted. This was in Beijing. You are free to go back to Changzhou, but you will either be martyred or you will certainly have will be imprisoned, be sent to a labor camp. You are free to decide. So he ordained him before he was expelled. Then this bishop went back to his hometown, which was Changzhou, and set up secretly as a soap maker and lived there incog. Well, nobody is incog in China. For several years, trying to minister to the sick and the poor in his native area, until he was arrested, tried, and then put in prison and forced to do work in the labor camp for 28 years, until he was finally released, a sick, broken man. But always so full of humor and forgiveness. And I brought two of my medical students to see him, and they knew nothing about, because they're not taught about what went on during the rebels. And it was all very wonderful, but they were not taught about what went on. The rest of the world has read books maybe like Wild Swans and so on. The worst I ever read was Life and Death in Shanghai. But I have read quite a few others. But his spirit of faith and forgiveness were such an inspiration. These boys who were in their late 20s just were absolutely stunned by the attitude and the forgiveness of a man who had been through all of that and could still joke about it. He's not the only one. There were so many others I have met too. The Chinese so-called leaders in the college had accepted me. They were fully so supportive, and they defended and protected me. I put all my cards on the table, photographs. I said, look, we were communist before you ever were. We share everything. We help the poor. We live as poorly as we can. You see, at that stage, I was sending kids to school. I had built 4 primary schools up in the mountains.
Did you have friends then? Like, did you socialize? Were there dinner parties? Was there...
The very first night we arrived after a horrific journey. Having spent 3 weeks in Beijing, we were put on over a train, the 4 of us, 2 going to the teachers of college, and Jill and I being sent to the medical college. The first night we arrived after, I think, a 15-hour journey from the provincial capital. We were put into a minibus. Had been told in Beijing we had this overnight journey. No, the other girls were choking with the colds. When we arrived, we were told we would be taken to a hotel, given breakfast and a shower, and then met by the college authorities. We arrived about 5 o'clock in the morning, were met, but no breakfast, no shower. We shoved into a minibus, driven around the city, because our minder had business, and one of the college vice presidents had business to do in the provincial capital. So we sat in the minibus until they were ready, and then off we set. First of all, parked on a railway line, no gates, anything, and Jill beside me thinking, if a train comes, what happens? I said, well, that's it. Well, we were driven then through the province to the town of Changzhou. Took about 12 hours. We're still very hungry. stopped off some kind of wayside restaurant for a meal and to go to loo. Jill went to the loo first and came back green in the face, said, "Don't, on your life, don't go in there." I didn't. Um, we were given a bowl of probably noodles. Being so hungry, you ate it. God knows what was in it. But noodles were their chief. Rice was more expensive. Noodles were the chief sustenance in Shanxi province. A variety of noodles, and also their own kind of dumplings, etc. Any meat was pork. If I wanted mutton, I needed to go to the Muslims. The sheep was strung up by its heels, and they took a what do we call, huge
Machete.
yes, and hacked off a lump for you. But there was always delighted the foreigner came to shop at their stall.
What were the Muslims like? I mean, were they practicing Muslims? Or
Oh
were they
yes, and there's one huge, beautiful mosque in the city. One area was the Muslim area, and Muslims were allowed to have more than one child. 2 children, though they had a lot of more, but the average person, otherwise the Han Chinese, no, only one child. Interesting, after the first time I came back from that holiday in Japan, having got information about churches in Changzhou, which I had not been able to find, I was determined to discover it. So now I had an address, got on my bike. Everybody rode pushbacks. I got on my bike and Saturday morning discovered the church way down a dirty, broken down lane, but only about 5 minutes away from where my flat was, the college. The huge gates were locked, but I found a little side gate, got in, and suddenly a woman came out of a little shop at the gateway, and she eyed me from head and foot several times. Suspiciously, she had never seen a foreign before. So I blessed myself, and she smiled and said, come along, and brought me into her little shop, and she wanted to take me to the priest. I didn't want to see him. I want to keep a very low profile. I had asked in my best Chinese, is there mass? And she said, not today, but tomorrow, yes, at 6 o'clock. You will come, will you? And I said, oh yes, I will. She asked me about 25 times if I would come. So I said, may I see your church? First of all, she took me to the priest's house, but fortunately he wasn't in. Then I said, may I see your church? She took me in, a side door, and there over the high altar was a huge picture of the Sacred Heart. I couldn't believe it. Wow. St. Anthony of Padua and St. Francis. So penny dropped, yes, the priests here must be Franciscans. Yes, half of that province had been evangelized by the Franciscans, probably in the 16th century. When I came on Sunday, I was stared out of existence. The church was absolutely packed with old people and little children, and then actually all ages too. And when I appeared in the doorway, they were saying some prayers which I didn't understand. I knew they weren't the Psalms, wasn't the Rosary, but they stopped dead. Every pair of eyes was fixed on me, because they'd never seen a foreigner before, probably not even on TV, because most of them wouldn't have had TV. So they made room for me, and there was the priest then appeared. He was a tubby little Franciscan in ample vestments. I had been to Mass once or twice in Beijing, the priest with his back to you, but here it was post-Vatican II, and I knew it was the right year, the right cycle. I produced my missal, and hands went out to grab it and to look, and then, of course, it wasn't Chinese, so given back to me. But the Mass was the Mass. At the end of the Mass, more prayers, no rush out. I thought I'll wait because my bike was jammed in among all the others, and then the priest came out, and there was benediction. And so I joined him in Latin to the amazement of my neighbours, because the hymns were same tunes. And then when the church had almost emptied, a young woman came in beside me, and she said, hello. I said, hello. She said, are you an English teacher? I said, yes, I am. I said, are you? She said, yes, I teach in number 2 middle school. I said, well, your pronunciation is very, very good. And she thanked me. And she said, where are you teaching? I said, the medical college. Oh, she said, I know someone there, Hawenje. I was in teacher training with her, but I haven't seen her for a long time. So will you tell her I was asking for her? So I thought, oh yes, I will. But when I met Wenjin, well, I had misgivings because I didn't know what the college you knew about me, my background, what I was. I was there to teach English quite definitely. And I was going to do a good job before they discovered who exactly I was anyway, because I knew the terrible anti-Christian, anti-religious attitudes in most people. Anyway, but as I say, the church was jammed with people, grandmas and grandpas who had kept the faith alive.
Were you excited that day, first day you went there?
I was thrilled.
You must have made a lot of friends with that congregation, did you?
No, I didn't, because the priest didn't want me to. Oh. And I didn't. We see that woman for several years, and when I finally saw her, I said, well, she had an aunt who was a sister, Chinese sister. So that's how I got to know the sisters in a town outside, and they introduced me to the bishop. That wonderful man. But years later, then I met this woman. I said, I haven't seen you for ages. And she said, well, I was sick. I said, are you all right? Yeah, fine. She went away, came back, and then she whispered, I had an abortion I had to have because, you see, her little girl was already 7. She said, I would have lost my job, my home, there would be no insurance, my child would get no education, etc. But I was aware of the poverty in the area, and then I heard about a Chinese scheme called the Hope Scheme, where they were they're very concerned about education, and there's great pressure. So in many of the areas, the province I was in was one of the poorest province, though it's the coal mine area. Bye-bye.
He's gone.
It's a coal mine area, and all constant tragedies which are not reported. Many of the local people, collapse of the shafts and so on. Anyway, this scheme called the Hopes Project, the government was building schools, wanting contributions, so that poor kids could go. But I knew a lot of the money was going into the wrong pockets.
Oh, corruption.
Terrible. So I decided I was going to try and find, first of all, to begin with, 2 kids or 4. But I didn't know where to start. So there was one of the men in the local government whose daughter, who was in high school, I had helped her with her English. So I asked him to find 4 poor families for me where I could, maybe I said 2 little boys, 2 little girls. I'll start them off and I'll send them to school for as long as I can. But I certainly...
Were you their teacher?
No, I wasn't. I didn't know where to find them. I knew there were kids who were getting no education. I said, I can't afford... You see, there was no free education in those days. So I said, I'll pay for them to primary, middle school, but there's no way I could pay for them in high school or university. Anyway, he said to me, well, he was a lawyer, and he said, well, I'll find, besides, I can't go and talk to this farmer or that farmer. So he said, I'll find children for you. So first of all, he found 4 families, 2 little boys and 2 little girls. The one family, a grandma, a mother, who was sitting there with tears rolling down her cheeks, but a smile. And she said to me, I am so happy that my little girl can go back to school. These kids were not beginning, they were now at so-called primary 4 level, but had to drop out because of tragedy and poverty. In this case, this woman and this couple had a so-called wayside restaurant where you could buy food. The little girl had to drop out of school because their little stall had gone on fire. Father had tried to save what he could, was very, very badly burnt. He was already in hospital, so there was no way they had money to pay for this child's continuing education. So I was able to pay for her. Then of the 2 little boys, Father had been working in mother...
You paid them just with your own salary, with the money that
which was very low anyway. But just to tell you, this little boy, Father had 2 boys. He was working in a stone quarry, was crushed by a rock. Wife an invalid, and no money to send the boy on to school. So I paid for him for the rest. Grandma was a garbage collector, and she supported them by collecting and garbage. Never came to the meeting empty-handed. I didn't give the money to the local authority. I gave it into the hands of the parents because I knew otherwise it would go to the wrong pocket. Now, this is only a scrap of the story. But after 2 years, I met the parents each year. After 2-3 years, that little girl was not there, and I wondered, and then I was given a letter. You see, I can't read Chinese characters, so one of my students translated, or one of the English teachers translated it for me. It said, "Thank you very much. We are so happy that our little girl can go back and continue her education. Now things are better. We have been able to rebuild our little wayside business. So we don't really need the money anymore, but other families do. So please give it to another family instead of us." I wept. The generosity, they could easily have grabbed it.
Yeah.
Well, I lost touch. Well, that little girl had made a speech and she was so grateful, and she said, "When I grow up, I'm going to help poor children just as you have helped me. It was so touching, the gratitude of these people. I heard later she got on very well. She was an extremely clever kid. Two of my boys I know got themselves finally into university. Several of my girls got themselves jobs or for their training. Once when I was in a taxi in Beijing, people always loved chatting to foreigners. One of the questions we were always asked, how many children have you? Because you see, they're only allowed until last year, 2 years ago, to have one child. But I said to the taxi driver, I have 54. He said, what? Do they all will live with you? I said, no, they don't. But they live at home, but I send them to school as best as I can. I pay their fees. Now, as I said, the government was suspicious where I got the money from. Sitting in my flat one day, was a knock on the door, and in comes a priest in full clericals, yes. Chinese, oh yes. But he had evidently heard I was helping kids to get into school, and he said, not much English, but enough for me to understand, I have to build 2 schools. I said, Father, that's not possible for me. That's the government business. But he said, they have confiscation of our church property, my church. They won't give it back until I can build schools because they are using the premises for school purposes. I said, Father, there's no way, he said. I said, I don't have that kind of money. He said, come and see. So insisted taking me up there, took about 5 hours, took in the state of the roads. And when I saw the place and I saw the kids, I felt I really must do something. But what can
What did it look like? It was 5 hours drive into the countryside.
Oh yes, way up in the mountains, like the roof of the world. Beautiful area, but very poor soil and crops. Not enough rain, so they weren't growing properly. But here was the broken down church, which had been devastated by the Mao Zedong's Red Guards. And the kids were sitting in one of the houses because it had been way back under religious order, possibly in the 16th, 17th century, but it was all devastated. It was a broken, well, there were no windows, there was a doorway.
Could you get money off the Sacred Heart?
Well, I tell you what happened. I said there was a sort of stove in the corner. The kids brought the coal or the wood, but there they were working away, unsupervised, totally unlike kids in these parts, determined to learn as best that they could and help each other. I thought, what can I do? Then I got an inspiration. I knew I was going to Tokyo for the holidays, and this time I was passing through Beijing, so I went to the Irish embassy. And they listened to me. They knew about the project, but I said, look, I'm going to keep an eye on it, but I've been shown the area. So they said, well, you will have to research. They gave me a huge wad of papers to fill in information, and if we are convinced that it is, you see, we cannot do anything for religion.
How much money were you looking for?
Wait, I tell you, we can do things for, we have a budget, all foreign embassies have a budget for education or social services. So if you can prove the need for education in that area, we'll give you 75% of the costs, but the local area has to find the other 25. Now I had to monitor. I don't remember how much. I had to monitor everything, but the party secretary, I knew a lot of it went in his hip pocket, but the ambassador said to me, we don't mind, so long as these children get to school that is wind and water tight. We know about corruption, but we will want all the invoices. So I had to monitor those. Now, the first school was paid for in that way by the Irish embassy in Beijing.
Was it about £10,000 or something?
Oh, I don't remember in terms of pounds. Then the second school, I applied to the society here in Ireland and Scotland, and they gave me 75%. Again, I had to monitor it. Then the third school, Chinese friends in Hong Kong were desperate to help education in China. Now they were much better off. Again, it's a wonderful story behind that family. She's still alive, Letty. She had a French husband and they were so good to me. Big Scottish connection there. So their family gave money to build another bigger school, primary.
All in the same area, or?
Well, and there were 4 in the province I was in. There were 4 surrounding counties, all terribly poor. But in Tokyo, I was introduced to the Franciscans in a big city centre parish with a great many foreigners there. And there I met a Father Callistus Sweeney, a 4th or 5th generation Irish American. And he listened to me, he looked at my photos, and he decided, when checking up on my background, that all this was genuine. So one day after Mass, great many foreigners, especially Americans, I believe, I wasn't there, but he said, there's an Irish sister working in China, very poor area, and she needs to rebuild or build churches. You see, I couldn't ask for money in China for any religious purpose. He said, if anybody is interested in helping, I'll be outside the church after Mass. He told me that people he was wearing in his religious habit were shoving money up his sleeves into his pocket. One little boy produced his pocket money. 2 American businessmen came with their checkbooks. How much do you need, Father? He told me later when he went back up to his office after having chatted to me the first time, he opened one of the drawers on the desk and it was stuffed with yen. And he said, I'd forgotten this was there because somebody had given it for a charitable purpose. So he said to me, you're the charitable purpose. But first I said, no, at this stage I had about 2 million yen. And there was no way I'm going to get that money back into China. But we have an international school in Tokyo. And I was introduced to a man whose children had been in that school, Catholic, Japanese. And he said to me, well, I have business in the USA, I have businesses also in China, and if you trust me, I can get that money back into, I had to tell him what my bank was in China. But he said, first of all, I'd like you to meet my wife. So I was staying in our college, university. We have a university for women in Tokyo, beautiful place. donated by the way back by the Japanese royal family. You have to see it to believe. Anyway, I was staying there, and that evening a limousine drew up at the door, and I was whisked away to a big Japanese club, the like of which I had never been in. Talk about five-star hotels. Anyway, he met me there and introduced me to his wife, who was Irish from a small town near Mullingar, Kilbeggan, I think. And he gave me another 500 yen.
How much is that?
I don't know, and of course it's all changed now, the exchange rate. But I had enough to rebuild these churches or get them redecorated by the local people. The building of the schools was 25%. The local authority gave the land, and I inspected it and said that it was very suitable.
So that's their 25%.
Yes,
the land.
or the local, the digging of the foundations, etc.
And who owns the school? Is the school a
Government, of course,
government
not mine.
Yeah. And how many kids? How big were these schools? How many kids?
The first one was tiny, something like 30 kids a year. Anyway, I had to provide for my salary, desks and chairs or benches.
And did the government pay the salaries of the teachers?
Yes, but very, very, very low. Terrible poverty. I saw where the teachers were housed as well.
And it was easy enough to find teachers, was it? Or
Oh, no, government appointed.
the government would get them and bring them in?
Yes, if they could.
So in the 14 years that you lived there, you would have made friends with the community, you would have had a strong community around you. But
My friends were all my students, wonderful boys and girls.
And can you describe to me one of them in particular? What was their family life like? Someone who you got to know particularly well.
Well, one boy is still writing to me. He's no boy now. He's a brain surgeon. He was absolutely wonderful. I know nothing about his family. I've met his mother once, and I think his grandmother. He is a surgeon in a big hospital in Wuxi, which is some distance from Shanghai. Works terribly hard. He is amongst those who came to my flat every single day at lunchtime to chat, to read, to have his work corrected, to share experiences. I was invited to his home sometimes for so-called lunch noodles, and desperately poor. He had in those days only one child allowed, and probably still they only have one child because their children are too expensive. So that kid had one miserable, bedraggled toy. When I came home on holiday in London, my niece had 3 children and rooms full of toys. But they said, look, we'll give them to. I said, I couldn't bring them back, and I wouldn't know who to give them to because everybody is needy.
And what happened towards the end of your stay in China? Did the Holy Order ask you to go somewhere else, or did
What do you mean by Holy Order?
I mean the Sacred Heart Order. Sorry.
No. I was there on contract with the VSO, with the college.
Okay.
But by the year 2000, the VSO want to withdraw me from the medical college to send me possibly to a teacher training institute. I didn't want to go. Well, I decided it's very, very severe winters. The ice on the roads was that thick, so I had several falls. You see, I have well, at that stage, I had two knee replacements. So if I fell on the ice, I could not get up. Somebody would come and lift me up. So I decided it really is time, I must leave. My first knee was now beginning again to cause me problems, pain. I realized I would have to have something to do it again, done to it again. So I told the college that I was going to resign, and they put a lot of pressure on me. The president said, well, president of the college, you can go home for a year and come back again. We want to keep you here.
Yeah.
But I realized I couldn't continue. So I wrote home and I said, I am going to resign from Regina. So at that stage I belonged to the Chinese province, and our sisters in Taiwan wanted me to come there. I had visited them several times for holidays, but they wanted me to come there to act as secretary because they didn't have sufficient good English.
So where did you go after China?
Well, they wanted me in Taiwan, but then Taiwan, my superiors here said no. So Taiwan sent me to Manila because there were quite a few young Chinese who wanted to be sisters or were there to study. So they said, if you go to Manila, you can help these young people. Climate there is much more manageable for you, especially in winter. So I went to Taiwan. No, sorry, I went to Manila, and I taught these young people, some in colleges of further education, some in the university, and gradually I got to meet more Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese sisters and priests who needed my help, and especially two priests who were doing their...
You must have loved Manila. I mean, it would be a beautiful tropical country, wonderful weather, happy people. Was the Philippines beautiful after China?
I saw nothing of the beauty of the Philippines except on the TV. We lived in a very dirty place in a suburb of Manila in Quezon City. People sleeping on the street, naked kids whom I tried to help and sent to school, corruption and pollution. Warm sun. Our little yard was, I can't say beautiful, but bright. Sunshine.
How long were you there in Manila for?
Well, between the Philippines and Vietnam, it was 8 years, commuting as when I could get a visa. Visa usually was 3 months time, so I commuted between Saigon and Manila every 3 months, teaching English to these students in the university or correcting their, mostly on the computer, correcting their thesis, the university thesis.
And what was...
Then these two priests graduated, got their master's degree, went back to Vietnam and told the bishop there that ideal to come to the seminary to teach these young seminarians because they desperately need English. So I got an invitation to go to a place called Longkang, a couple hours drive north of Saigon. So I wrote home here. But by that time, our Chinese province was now amalgamated with Korea. So I had two superiors, one in Seoul and one in Dublin. So I wrote to both and said I had this invitation to go and work in Vietnam. Was that okay? And I got full approval. So that's when I started this commuting between the two. Every six months or 3 months, sorry. Because I lived in seminary, which was several hours drive north of Saigon.
Was it in a beautiful place? Was it nice?
It was lovely, and there were 400 seminarians, 450, and still are. Waiting list, amazing. I loved the boys. Well, boys, some of them were in their late 20s and early 30s. And at least once a week I was taking to another town to teach the seminarians, because before they were accepted in the seminary, they were expected to have completed a university course. So I was helping them as well.
So in all these trips, especially in Manila and in Philippines, did you have holidays? Did you have a weekend off? You know, where you'd maybe hop in a car and go to the beach or something, or go and visit somebody?
Once I was taken to a beach in Manila, in Quezon, filthy place. And once or twice I was taken to beaches in Vietnam. These were beautiful places. Sometimes expeditions on the bus with the students, or sometimes by car.
Do you remember many of the students in Vietnam?
Not their names, but yes, and some of them still write to me or try to Skype.
So we're coming to the end of the whole interview now.
Yes.
Like when you look back in your whole life, obviously it's a very hard thing to do, all the ups and downs and the travels, and you know, what stands out as the most meaningful moments in your life?
Just sheer gratitude for the wonderful people I have met, and knowing the terrible sufferings that there are going on in China, in Korea, and Vietnam, the poverty, the murders that are going on under President Rodrigo Duterte. It's absolutely awful. So this is what gives meaning to my life, to pray for these people, because there's nothing else I can do. My students in China said I helped them to understand the meaning, the purpose in life. Some of them still searching. Many of them have no faith in God, but they are absolutely fantastic people, devoted to helping the sick. These are the doctors, nurses. It's not my work, it's work that the Lord did through me. But they gave me some really wonderful tributes, because they said I gave them confidence, helped them to believe in themselves that they could do it, and they did. Many of them are talked up doctors and surgeons now in Beijing, Shanghai, Xi'an, many of the top cities in China. So that was a privilege that I have at least been able to help them. Come in.
Hello, how
Hi.
are you? Would you like a cup of tea?
Would you like tea?